So, Mimic 2. Wow, was this a confusing movie. It was mostly confusing to poor writing this time around. Yeah, this was one of those horror movie sequels. So, where do I begin? Alright, so it turns out that at the end of the movie, where they wipe out all of the monsters, or insects, or mutants, the evolved insects, I think. The Judas bugs, we'll call them that. Turns out they weren't all wiped out. There is still one left. I think there was just one left. And it's attacking people again in the city. And it's up to another researcher to discover what's going on and put a stop to it. And wow, this movie. The characters in this movie are so inconsistent and so strange that it's hard to fathom. There's like one chick, for example, the main character, who takes selfies of herself when she cries and then labels them after the names of the guys who made her cry. And it's never fully explained why she does this. She has like an entire closet door full of these pictures, and yet she never really gives a reason why she has them. The police in it think she's behind some of the killings at first, but then turn right around, like the very next scene, and say, how could you even think she could do something like this? What do you mean? Like, they arrest her, and the dude is like, you didn't like any of those guys that died. I think that's a connection. And then the very next scene, the next scene, he's like, how could a 120-pound woman throw a 200-pound dude up on a lamppost or something like that? Like, what? Honestly, like, the characters' actions in this movie were so baffling. Like, it's even worse than, like, characters in Friday the 13th. There was just confusion to it. Also, the motivation of the insect in this one is confusing. Before, it was just, Oh, wait. So, the characters are not that well written. The movie in general isn't that well written. Like, there's a lot of the same issues I had before, only more so. Like, I complained before, how would these things blend into society? My next question is, how did this thing not get seen by anyone? There's one scene where a guy is dragged through the street, then dragged up a building past several windows where someone could have seen something happening, but were all conveniently distracted by things. Like, is no one awake in this city? It's a city. This dude is being pulled up a building, and not one person notices? I mean, there isn't even the weird Spoons kid in this movie. Like, no one else notices these things. Except for the guys that get killed by them. Well, some of them anyways. Instead of being a bunch of them, there's just one of them. And the characters in this movie were not great. The acting by some of them, particularly by the drunk teen in it. Yeah, there's this drunk kid in the last half who hit on the teacher in the first half. His acting was especially not that great. It's just, what is with these weird characters? Just a lot of stuff in this movie didn't make sense. Even more so than the first movie. The first movie had some things that didn't quite make sense, but in comparison to this, like, that stuff is just minor gripes, very minor gripes. The CG in this actually looks worse than the first one. Of course, it's a direct-to-video sequel, so that doesn't really surprise me, but it's really not that great. And they had an opportunity to make them a lot creepier, and yeah, I'll get to that in the spoilers section, because yeah, that's where very big complaints come in. But yeah, they had an opportunity to make them look scarier, but they squandered it. The characters were not well written. This movie was not well written. The acting wasn't great this time around. Even some of the shots weren't great in this movie. I'm not one to complain about cinematography that much, since I know how difficult it can be, but man, it was this movie. What would I give this movie, ladies and gentlemen? I'm sorry, folks, if you're watching this that worked on the movie. I'm giving it a 1 out of 5. This just did not work. I mean, I've seen bad horror movie sequels before, but this is probably the worst I've reviewed for this channel. Like, the others before were somewhat interesting, but this one, it was actually kind of boring, and nothing made sense. Why am I doing these reviews? Why? Spoiler time. We're going to get into the spoiler section. Okay, now, where to begin? First of all, this time around, like before, the creature's motivation was, spread the hive, spread the species. This time around, the entire species is gone, so it wants to breed with a person this time. It wants to breed with a human woman this time. Okay. It just seemed strange to me why a species would resort to that. Like, humans are very far from what they are, so why would that be the Judas bug's go-to thing? I don't get it. And also, what I talked about earlier with, like, the creepy design. So the thing is taking people's faces so it can make itself look more human. Now, that is an opportunity for a creepy design. In fact, there's one scene where she takes a picture outside of a window and scares off the Judas bug. Yeah, apparently bright lights scare them this time in this movie. And looks at the picture, and yeah, it's like this creepy, deformed face of the janitor, and I thought, wow, that is actually a creepy design. Props. But when they show it, it's just crap CGI. Like, it looked like the face was at least prosthetic, so why would you go to the trouble of making a prosthetic? I don't know. I guess there was no time or money. Anyways, yeah, the CGI was bad. Oh, and at the end, where it disguises itself as the cop, how did that fool anybody at all? It didn't even look like the guy, let alone a person. So, you're willing to tell me to believe that the police actually thought this thing that looks nothing like the police officer was the police officer. It had no pupils. Its face had barely any features on it. It's like he was wearing a mask. And they... At the end especially, like the very last ending thing, I was just so done. So, not police officer bug thing gets decapitated and it's lying in front of the door, flailing around, and the kid and the woman are like, oh, well, I guess we have 9 days then, because that's how long it takes a cockroach to starve to death. I looked at that and I'm like, are you serious? They're just going to sit there and wait for 9 days? Like, the thing can't get up. It can't see you. If you keep hitting it over and over with objects, eventually it'll die. You're willing to tell me that this smart woman who apparently knew everything about this insect because she worked on the Judas Project too, or whatever it was called. That was her plan? Just... like, even I know that. I'm not a scientist, and I know if I hit something over and over again, it'll die. But apparently in this movie, that's too crazy. Ugh. And there were other stuff in here, too, like... there was a strip scene in this movie. You know, while I, as a man, can't really complain about that, it seemed entirely unnecessary. Like, there was almost no point to it. It's like, oh, this thing smells your pheromones, so you gotta take off your clothes and put on my jacket, and then we can get out of here. You know, I'm not a biologist, but I feel like the thing that would emit the most pheromones would be your bare skin, which she was bearing quite a bit in that scene. So you're willing to tell me that would actually work? Like, she would actually go along with that plan? I know that wouldn't work. I said that the very second, like, okay, you take off your shirt, but your shirt isn't what gives off pheromones. You give off pheromones. It's going to know that another source of pheromones is going that way if it can detect them. Also, another thing, it's a male in this movie. It's a male Judas bug that wants to breed with a woman, yet continuity says there was only one male in the first movie, and it got hit by a train. They established there was one male and only one male at all. So, like, did it evolve to be a male, then? Like, the evolution thing is played around in this, yet I feel like it's just an excuse to, you know, fill in the gaps so they don't have to. God, there's even one scene, talk about inconsistency, where, like, the cop takes the other police officer's gun and runs back into the building, and you can hear the SWAT guys yelling, open fire, yet nobody fires a single shot. And even one person has to yell, stand down. What do you mean, stand down? Nobody did anything. And anyways, if I were a cop, I'd shoot the guy. You know, you don't punch an officer in the face, steal his gun, and then run into a building. You don't do that. So yeah, that was Mimic 2, overly powerful blacklights, schools that should know whether or not a kid has parents, pheromone logic fail, bad CGI, bad acting, bad writing, and face stealing. Mimic 2 in a nutshell.